Episode 31, Wailing Caverns.
Even though the same room is pitch dark at night, it's the day that fills it with light and the night that takes the light away. And it's the same with things we call indifferent or neutral, like riches, strength, beauty, titles, kingship, and their opposites, death, exile, illness, pain, and all such evils that we fear to varying degrees. It's wickedness or virtue that gives these things the name of good or evil. An object isn't inherently hot or cold. It becomes hot when thrown into a furnace and cold when dropped into water. Death is honorable when connected to something honorable, like virtue and a soul that despises the worst hardships. Furthermore, there are vast differences among the qualities we call neutral. For example, death isn't as indifferent as whether your hair is worn evenly or unevenly. Death belongs among those things that aren't really evils but still seem like evils, because we have within us a love of self, a desire to live and to protect ourselves, and a fear of dissolution, because death seems to take away many goods and pull us away from the abundance we're used to. There's also another factor that makes us shy away from death. We're familiar with the present, but we don't know the future we're heading into, and we fear the unknown. Moreover, it's natural to fear the underworld, where death is thought to lead us. So, although death is something indifferent, it's not something we can easily ignore. The soul must be toughened through long practice so that it can learn to face the sight and approach of death. Death should be despised more than it usually is. We believe too many of the stories about death. Many thinkers have worked hard to make death seem more terrifying. They've described the prison of the underworld and the land covered in everlasting light, where within his blood-stained cave Hell's huge guard sprawls his ugly length of half-crunched bones and terrifies the disembodied ghosts with never-ceasing bark. Even if you can prove that these are just stories and that the dead have nothing to fear, another fear sneaks in. The fear of going to the underworld is matched by the fear of going nowhere. Given these beliefs, which have been drilled into us for so long, how could facing death bravely be anything other than glorious and worthy of being considered one of the greatest accomplishments of the human mind? The mind will never rise to virtue if it believes that death is an evil, but it will rise if it believes that death is indifferent. It's not natural for someone to face a destiny with courage if they believe that destiny is evil. They'll approach it slowly and reluctantly, but nothing glorious can come from hesitation and cowardice. Virtue does nothing under compulsion. Moreover, no action is honorable unless the person doing it is fully committed to it and puts their whole heart into it without any part of them rebelling. When someone faces something they believe to be evil, either out of fear of worse evils or in hope of achieving something important enough to make the evil bearable, their judgment is pulled into two directions. On one side is the reason to act, and on the other is the reason to hold back because of fear of danger. As a result, they're torn between the two, and when this happens, the glory of action is lost. Virtue carries out its plans only when the spirit is in full agreement with itself. There's no fear in any of its actions. Do not yield to evils, but go still braver whenever your fortune allows. You can't go still braver if you believe those things are real evils. Remove this belief from your soul, or else your fears will keep you holding back, preventing you from moving forward like a soldier. Some in our school would say that Zeno's argument is incorrect. The second argument I mentioned, which is set against us, is deceptive and wrong. But I refuse to reduce such important questions to mere logical rules or to the subtle tricks of an outdated system. Away with all that nonsense that makes someone feel trapped when asked a question, forcing them to agree to a premise and then making them say something they don't actually believe. When truth is at stake, we must act more openly, and when we're combating fear, we must act more boldly. These questions, which the dialecticians twist into complexities, I prefer to solve and weigh rationally, with the goal of convincing rather than forcing agreement. When a general is about to lead an army into battle, an army ready to face death for their wives and children, how will he inspire them? I remind you of the fathers who took on a war that concerned the whole state by themselves, standing in the pass at Thermopylae. They had no hope of victory, no hope of returning. The place where they stood was to be their grave. What words would you use to encourage them to block the way with their bodies, to take on the destruction of their entire tribe, and to retreat from life rather than oppose? Would you say that which is evil is not glorious? But death is glorious, therefore death is not evil. What a powerful speech. After such words, who wouldn't throw themselves onto the enemy's spears and die where they stood? But take Leonidas. How bravely he addressed his men. He said, "Fellow soldiers, let us have breakfast, knowing that we shall dine in Hades." The food didn't stick in their mouths or catch in their throats or slip from their fingers. They eagerly accepted the invitation to breakfast and to supper as well. Think, too, of the famous Roman general. His soldiers had been sent to seize a position, and as they were about to make their way through a huge enemy army, he said to them, "You must go now, fellow soldiers, to take that place from which there's no must about your returning." You see, then, how straightforward and commanding virtue is, but how can your tricky logic make anyone more courageous or upright? Rather, it weakens the spirit, which should never be more free and confident than when planning something great. It's not just the 300, it's all of humanity that needs to be freed from the fear of death. But how can you prove to all these people that death isn't an evil? How can you overcome the beliefs we've all had in our lives? Beliefs we've had since we were born. What help can you offer for our human weakness? What can you say to make people rush eagerly into danger? What persuasive speech can you use to turn aside this universal fear? Or what clever argument can you use to change the long-held conviction of the human race? Will you offer me catchy phrases or string together some tricky logic? It takes great weapons to strike down great monsters. Remember the fierce serpent in Africa that terrified the Roman legions more than the war itself? And couldn't be harmed by arrows or slings. It couldn't even be wounded by Pythias, because its enormous size and toughness made spears and any weapon thrown by humans bounce off. It was finally destroyed by rocks as big as millstones. So are you throwing weak arguments like yours against death? Can you stop a charging line with a tiny tool like
Our great leader aspired
Your
to enter the
arguments
emerald
may be
dream
sharp,
and help
but there's
regrow these
nothing
harsh
sharper
lands
than a
back
stalk
into
of
the lush
grain.
forest it once
Some
was.
arguments are useless and ineffective because they are too
In
subtle.
Arlex's dream turned
Farewell.
into a nightmare, and corrupt creatures began to inhabit it.
Letter 83, on drunkenness. You asked me to give you an account of each day and the whole day, too. So you must think highly of me if you believe that there is nothing in my days that I need to hide. We should live in such a way that everyone could see how we live. And we should think as if there is someone who could look into our souls, because there is someone who can. What good does it do to hide something from people? Nothing is hidden from the sight of God. He sees everything in our souls, and he looks into our thoughts. Just like someone who could leave at any moment. So I'll do as you asked and gladly tell you in a letter what I'm doing and in what order. I'll keep watching myself constantly, and this is a very useful habit. I'll review each day. The reason we do wrong is that no one looks back over their own life. We only think about what we're going to do next. But our plans for the future always depend on what we've done in the past. Today, no one took even the smallest part of my day from me. The whole time was divided between rest and reading. I spent a little time on physical exercise, and I have to think old age for making exercise require very little effort. As soon as I start moving, I get tired. And getting tired is the goal of exercise, no matter how strong you are. You ask who I exercise with. One person is enough for me, the slave Farius, a pleasant fellow, as you know, but I will soon exchange him for someone else. At my age, I need someone even younger. Farius says that he and I are at the same stage of life because we're both losing our teeth. Even now, I can barely keep up with him when he runs, and very soon I won't be able to keep up at all. So you see what little benefit we get from daily exercise. A wide gap quickly opens up between two people who travel at different speeds. My slave is climbing up just as I'm coming down, and you surely know how much faster coming down is. Actually, I was wrong. My life isn't just coming down, it's falling outright. Do you still want to know how our race turned out today? We tied, something that rarely happens in a running contest. After wearing myself out this way, because I can't really call it exercise, I took a cold bath. But at my house, a cold bath is just short of hot. I used to be a fan of cold water, celebrating the new year by plunging into the canal, just as naturally as I would set out to do some reading, writing, or to compose a speech. I used to start the new year with a plunge into the Virgo aqueduct. Now I've switched my loyalty first to the Tiber, and then to my favorite tank, which is only warmed by the sun, and only when I'm most robust and when my health is in perfect shape. I don't have much energy left for bathing. After the bath, I had some stale bread and a breakfast that didn't require a table. No need to wash my hands after such a meal. Then came a very short nap. You know my habit. I only take a quick nap, like unhitching a horse for a short break. I'm satisfied if I can just stop staying awake. Sometimes I know I've slept, other times I just suspected. Now, suddenly, I hear the noise of the races. The sound of cheering hits my ears all at once. But this doesn't disturb my thoughts or even break their flow. I can handle noise with the complete calm. The mix of voices blending into one sound feels to me like waves crashing, or like the wind whipping through the trees. Or like any other sound that doesn't mean anything. So what have I been thinking about, you ask? I'll tell you. A thought has been sticking with me since yesterday. What did the greatest minds mean when they used the smallest and most complicated arguments to prove the most important problems? Arguments that might be true, but still seem like tricks. Zeno, the greatest of men and the founder of our noble and sacred school of philosophy, wants to discourage us from getting drunk. Listen to this argument proving that a good man won't get drunk. No one trusts a secret to a drunk man, but people do trust secrets to a good man. Therefore, a good man won't get drunk. Notice how silly Zeno's argument seems when we create a similar one to contrast this. There are many examples, but here's one. No one trusts a secret to a man who is asleep, but people do trust secrets to a good man. Therefore, a good man doesn't go to sleep. Posidonius defends our master Zeno in the only way possible, but I believe it can't be defeated even this way. Posidonius argues that the word drunken can be used in two ways. One for a man who's drunk and out of control, and the other for a man who regularly gets drunk and is a slave to the habit. Zeno, he says, meant the latter. The man who is in the habit of getting drunk, not the one who is currently drunk. No one would trust a secret to this person because he might blurt it out when he's drunk. This is a mistake. The first argument refers to someone who is actually drunk, not someone who is going to get drunk. You'll surely agree that there's a big difference between a man who is drunk and a drunkard. A person who is actually drunk might be drunk for the first time and might not have the habit, while a drunkard might often be sober. I interpret the word in its usual meaning, especially since the argument was made by someone who carefully chooses his words and weighs his language. Moreover, if this is what Zeno meant, and what he wanted us to understand, that he was trying to use a word with two meanings to create a trick, and no one should do this when the truth is the goal. Let's admit that Zeno meant what Posidonius says he did. Even so, the conclusion is false. That secrets aren't trusted to a habitual drunkard. Think about how many soldiers who aren't always sober have been trusted by a general, a captain, or a centurion with messages that must be kept secret. Regarding the famous plot to kill Gaius Caesar, the Caesar who defeated Pompey and took control of the state, Tilius Cimber was trusted with it just as much as Gaius Cassius was. Cassius drank only water his whole life, while Tullius Cimber was a drunk and a brawler. Cimber even joked about it, saying, "I carry a master. I can't even carry my liquor." So, let everyone remember people they know who can't be trusted with wine, but can be trusted with words. But one case comes to mind that I'll share. so it's not forgotten. Life should be full of memorable examples. Let's not always look back to ancient history. Lucius Piso, the director of public safety in Rome, was drunk from the moment he was appointed. He spent most of the night at banquets and slept until noon. That's how he spent his mornings. Still, he was very diligent in his official duties, including protecting the city. Even the deified Augustus trusted him with secret orders when he made him governor of Thrace. Piso conquered that country. Tiberius also trusted him when he took a vacation in Campania, leaving behind many critical issues that stirred up both suspicion and hatred. I think that since Piso's drunkenness worked out well for the emperor, Tiberius then appointed Cossus, a man of authority and good sense, but so soaked and drunk that once, at a Senate meeting after a banquet, he fell into a deep sleep that no one could wake him from, and he had to be carried home. It was to this man that Tiberius sent many orders, written in his own hand, orders he didn't trust even to his household officials. Cossus never let a single secret slip, whether personal or public. So let's get rid of speeches like this. No man under the influence of alcohol has control over his soul. Just as new wine bursts the vats and the dregs rise to the surface from the strength of fermentation, so when wine ferments in a person, wherever lies hidden inside is brought up and exposed. Just as a man overcome by drink can't keep his food down after drinking too much, he also can't keep a secret. He spills out both his own secrets and those of others. This is what usually happens, but so does this. We discuss serious matters with people who we know drink heavily. So the argument made in defense of Zeno's logic is false, that secrets aren't trusted to habitual drunkards. How much better is it to criticize drunkenness directly and expose its vices? Even the average good person avoids them, not to mention the perfect sage, who is satisfied with quenching his thirst. The sage, even if he occasionally gets carried away by good company, always stops short of getting drunk. We'll talk later about whether a wise man's mind is affected by too much wine and if it leads him to act foolishly like a drunk. But for now, if you want to prove that a good man shouldn't get drunk, why use logic? Show how shameful it is to drink more than you can handle and not know your own limits. Show how often the drunkard does things that make him ashamed when he's sober. Say that drunkenness is just a state of insanity that we willingly bring on ourselves. Extend the drunkard's stay for several days, and what you doubt, it's madness. Even as it is, the madness isn't any less. It just doesn't last long. Think of Alexander the Great, who stabbed Clytius, his dearest and most loyal friend. At a banquet, after realizing what he'd done, Alexander wanted to die, and he certainly should have. Drunkenness brings out and reveals every kind of vice and removes the sense of shame that hides our evil actions. More people avoid doing wrong because they're ashamed of it than because they have good intentions. When the strength of wine takes over and controls the mind, every hidden evil comes out. Drunkenness doesn't create vice, it just brings it to light. The lustful man doesn't even wait for the privacy of a bedroom. Without delay, he gives in to his desires. The unchaste man publicly shows his sickness. The ill-tempered person doesn't hold back his words or his hands. The arrogant man becomes more arrogant. The cruel man, ruthless. The slanderer, more spiteful. Every vice is unleashed and comes to the forefront. Besides, we forget who we are. Our words become slurred and poorly spoken. Our gaze becomes unsteady, our steps falter, our head spins, and the ceiling seems to move around as if a storm was shaking the whole house. Our stomachs ache when the wine causes gas, makes our insides swell. At the time, these problems can be endured as long as the person still has some natural strength left. But what can he do when sleep wakens him and drunkenness turns into indigestion? Think of the disasters caused by drunkenness in entire nations. This evil has betrayed the most spirited and warlike races to their enemies. It has breached walls defended by years of hard fighting. It has forced once unyielding and defiant people to submit to foreign rule. This evil has defeated in the wine cup those who were invincible on the battlefield. Alexander, whom I just mentioned, survived many long marches, battles, and winter campaigns, which he endured by overcoming the disadvantages of time and place, crossing many rivers from unknown sources and many seas, all without harm. But excessive drinking took him down, along with the infamous death-dealing cup of Hercules. What glory is there in holding your liquor when you've won the prize and the other drinkers are either passed out or vomiting, unable to keep up with your challenge to drink more? When you're the last one standing at the party, when you've outdrunk everyone else, proving yourself the most capable, yet you're defeated by the barrel itself. Mark Antony was a great man, a man of remarkable ability. What ruined him and drove him into foreign customs and un-Roman vices, if not drunkenness and, just as potent as wine, his love for Cleopatra? This made him an enemy of the state. This made him no match for his enemies. This made him cruel as he sat at the table with the heads of state leaders brought in, identifying their faces and hands among the most elaborate feasts and royal luxuries after having prescribed them. Even though he was heavy with wine, he still thirsted for blood. It was bad enough that he got drunk while doing these things. How much worse that he did them while actually drunk. Cruelty often follows drinking because a man's sound mind is corrupted and made savage, just as a lingering illness makes people ill and drives them wild with the slightest frustration. So frequent bouts of drunkenness brutalize the soul. People often lose control of themselves. The habit of madness lingers, and the vices that alcohol stirs up remain even after the alcohol is gone. So you should explain why the wise men shouldn't get drunk. Show the ugly truth and the haunting evils of drunkenness with facts, not just words. Do the simplest of all. Show that what people call pleasures become punishments once they go beyond their limits. If you try to prove that the wise men can drink too much wine and still stay on course even though he's drunk, you might as well try to prove with logic that he won't die if he swallows poison, that he won't sleep if he takes a sleeping pill, or that he won't vomit and expel what clogs his stomach when you give him hellebore. But when a man's feet stumble and his speech is slurred, what reason do you have to believe that he's half sober and half drunk? Farewell. Letter 84. On gathering ideas. The trips you mentioned, trips that shake the laziness out of me, I consider them good for both my health and my studies. You see how they benefit my health, because my love for reading makes me lazy and neglectful of my body. I can get some exercise while traveling. As for my studies, I'll explain how these trips help them too. Since I haven't let my reading slip even a little bit, and I believe reading is essential, not only to keep me from being too self-satisfied, but also to learn what others have discovered through their hard work, so I can judge their findings and think about the new discoveries still to be made. Reading feeds the mind and refreshes it when it gets tired from studying. This refreshment is impossible without study. We shouldn't focus only on writing or only on reading. If we only write, we'll wear ourselves out and become gloomy. And if we only read, we'll become weak and lack energy. It's better to switch between them and combine both, so the things we learn from reading can be solidified through life. People say we shouldn't follow the example of bees, who fly around and gather the flowers they need to make honey, and then store and organize everything they've got. These bees, as our poet Virgil says, pack the flowing honey tight and fill their hives with sweet nectar. It's not clear whether the juice they collect from flowers instantly turns into honey, or if the bees change what they've gathered into honey by mixing it with something from themselves and with their breath's special quality. Some experts believe that bees don't actually make honey, but just gather it. They say that in India, honey has been found on the leaves of certain reeds, created either by the unique dew in that region or by the reed's juice, which is unusually sweet and rich. They also say that a similar quality exists in our own grasses, though it's less obvious. A creature born to do this job could find and collect it. Others believe that the bees take away what they've gathered from the delicate flowers and plants and turn it into honey through careful storing and preserving. Helped by something like fermentation, where different parts come together to form one substance. But I shouldn't get off topic. I believe we should follow the bees, example 2, and carefully sift through everything we've gathered from a wide range of reading. These ideas are better preserved if they're kept separate at first, then using the special abilities nature has given us and our natural talents. We should blend these different ideas into one delicious mixture. Even though it might show where it came from, it should still be clearly different from its original sources. This is what we see nature doing in our own bodies without us even trying. The food we eat, as long as it stays in its original form and floats in our stomachs as an undigested mass, is a burden, but it turns into tissue and blood only after it's changed from its original form. It's the same with the food that nourishes our minds. We need to make sure that what we've absorbed doesn't stay the same, or it won't truly become a part of us. We must digest it, otherwise it will just stay in our memory and won't reach our reason. Let's fully absorb these ideas and make them our own, so that something new and unified is created from many different elements. Just like how a single number is formed from several smaller ones when we add them up. This is what our mind should do. It should hide away all the pieces that helped it, and reveal only what it has made from them. Even if you end up resembling the person you admire deeply, I'd want you to resemble him as a child resembles his father, not as a picture resembles its original, because a picture is a lifeless thing. You might ask, won't it be obvious whose style, reasoning, or clever sayings you're imitating? I think that sometimes it's impossible to tell who's being imitated if the copy is truly accurate. A true copy leaves its own mark on all features that it takes from the original, blending them into one unified whole. Don't you see how many voices there are in a choir? Yet out of the many voices we can only hear one sound. In that choir, one voice sings the high notes, another the low, and another the middle range. There are women's voices too, mixed with the men's, and the flute plays along with them. In that choir, the individual singers' voices are hidden. What we hear is the combined voice of all. Of course, I'm talking about the king of choir, the old philosophers knew. In our modern performances, we have more singers than there used to be spectators in the theaters of old. The allies are filled with rows of singers. Brass instruments surrounded the auditorium. The stage echoes with flutes and other instruments of every kind. And yet from all these different sounds, a harmony is produced. I want my mind to be like this, equipped with many skills, many teachings, and examples of conduct taken from many periods in history, but all blending together harmoniously into one. How can this be done, you ask? By constant effort and by doing nothing without the approval of reason. If you're willing to listen to reason, it will tell you, give up the pursuits that have made you run around aimlessly. Give up wealth, which is neither a danger or a burden to those who have it. Give up the pleasures of the body and the mind. They only soften and weaken you. Give up your quest for power. It's an inflated, idle, and empty pursuit with no real goal, as worried about being overtaken as it is about having no one following. It's plagued by envy, actually by double envy, and you see how miserable a person is when someone who is envied also feels the envy themselves. Do you see those grand houses with crowds of people making noise as they wait to pay their respects? They'll insult you as you enter the door, and even more after you've entered. Avoid the steps that lead to rich men's homes, and the approach is very dangerous by the huge crowd, because there you'll be standing not just on the edge of a cliff, but also on a slippery ground. Instead, steer yourself toward wisdom and follow her ways, which offer true peace and abundance. Whatever seems important in human affairs, no matter how small it really is, and only prominent by person to the lowest things can only be reached by a difficult and tiring path. It's a rough road that leads to the heights of greatness, but if you want to reach its peak, which lies far above the reach of fortune, you'll look down on everything and that people consider lofty. But even so, you can reach the top by traveling on level ground. Farewell. Letter 85. On some vague syllogisms. I was planning to go easy on you and avoid discussing some of the more difficult topics. I was satisfied just to give you a small sample of the views held by our Stoic school, which believes that virtue alone is enough to live a happy life. But now you ask me to include all of our logical arguments of those made by other schools that try to diminish us. If I were to do that, it would result in a book instead of a letter. And I must say again and again that I do not enjoy these kinds of debates. I feel embarrassed to step into the arena and defend such important ideas with such weak tools. Here's an example. A person who is wise is also self-controlled. A self-controlled person is steady. A steady person is untroubled. Someone who is untroubled is free from sadness, and someone who is free from sadness is happy. Therefore, a wise person is happy, and wisdom is enough to live a happy life. Some of the peripatetics, followers of Aristotle, respond to this argument by saying that words like untroubled, steady, and free from sadness should be understood to mean that someone is rarely troubled and only a little bit, not that they are never troubled. Similarly, they say that someone is called free from sadness if they don't often feel sad, or if their sadness is not too strong. They argue that it's not natural for a person to be completely free from sadness, or that the wise person is not overwhelmed by grief but only touched by it, and they present other arguments along these lines, all based on the school's teachings. They do not eliminate the passions. This way, they only reduce them. But how insignificant is the advantage we give to the wise person if they are just a little braver than the most cowardly, a little happier than the most miserable, a little more self-controlled than the most out of control, and a little greater than the lowest. Would a runner boast about his speed by comparing himself to those who can barely? This is what true speed looks like, not the kind that earns praise by being compared to what is slowest. Would you call a person healthy who only has a mild fever? No, because good health does not mean being just a little sick. They say the wise person is called untroubled in the same way that ripe fruit is called mellow. Not that there is no firmness at all, but that the firmness is less than before. That idea is incorrect because I'm not talking about gradually reducing the bad feelings in a good person, but about completely eliminating them. There should be no bad feelings at all, not even small ones. If there are any, they will grow, and as they grow, they will hinder the person. Just as a large and complete cataract, a cloudy area in the lens of the eye, can make someone completely blind, even a medium-sized cataract can dull their vision. If, by your definition, the wise person has any passions at all, their reason will not be strong enough to control them, and they will be carried away, as if by a strong current, especially if you give them not just one passion to wrestle with, but all passions. And a group of even moderate passions can affect the person more than a single passion. The person has a desire for money, although only a moderate amount. They have ambition, but it's not fully awakened. They have a temper, but it can be calmed down. They are inconsistent, but not extremely so. They have lust, but not in a strong way. We would rather deal with someone who has one fully developed vice than with someone who has all the vices, but none of them in extreme form. Again, it doesn't matter how strong the passion is, no matter its size. It doesn't listen to reason and doesn't welcome advice. Just like no animal, whether wild or tame, obeys reason, since nature made it unable to understand advice. Passions don't follow or listen, no matter how small they are. Tigers and lions never lose their wildness. They might calm down for a while, but when you least expect it, their softened fierceness can turn into madness. Vices are never truly tamed. Again, if reason prevails, the passions won't even start. But if they start against the will of reason, they will maintain themselves against the will of reason. It's easier to stop them in the beginning than to control them once they gain strength. This halfway approach is misleading and useless. It's like saying that we should be moderately insane or moderately sick. Only virtue has moderation. The evils that afflict the mind do not allow for moderation. It's easier to remove them entirely than to control them. Can anyone doubt that the vices of the human mind, when they have become chronic and deeply rooted, which we call diseases, are beyond control, like greed, cruelty, and wantonness? The same applies to the passions because they are devices. Again, if you allow sadness, fear, desire, or other forces any room, they will no longer be within our control. And why? Simply because the causes that stir them up are controlled. They will increase in proportion to the size and closeness of the causes that trigger them. Fear will grow if the thing causing terror seems larger or closer, and desire will grow stronger if the hope of a greater gain arises. If the existence of the passions is beyond our control, so is the extent of their power. Once they start, they will grow with their causes and become as strong as they will grow to be. Moreover, no matter how small these vices are, they will grow larger. Anything harmful never stays within limits. No matter how small a disease is at the beginning, it can spread quickly, and sometimes even a slight worsening of a disease can break down a weakened body. But how foolish it is to believe that we can control the end of something when its beginnings are beyond our control. How can I bring something to an end if I didn't have the power to stop it from starting? It's easier to keep something out than to control it once it's inside. Some people make a distinction like this. If a person has self-control and wisdom, they are indeed at peace in their mind and habits, but not in the terms of the outcomes. For as far as their mind is concerned, they are not troubled, sad, or afraid. There are many external causes that can disturb them. What they mean is this: so-and-so is not naturally an angry person, but sometimes they do get angry. Or they are not naturally fearful, but sometimes they do experience fear. In other words, they are free from the fault, but not from the passion of fear. However, if fear is allowed to enter, it will eventually turn into a vice, and anger, once admitted into the mind, will change the previous habit of a mind that was once free from anger. Besides, if the wise person, instead of ignoring all external causes, ever fears anything, then when the time comes for them to face a spear, flames, or other dangers for the sake of their country, laws, and freedom, they will do so reluctantly and with a weakened spirit. Such inconsistency of mind is not fitting for the wise person. Then again, we should make sure that two ideas that should be tested separately are not confused. The conclusion that only what is honorable is truly good is reached independently of the conclusion that virtue alone is enough for a happy life. If only what is honorable is good, everyone agrees that virtue is enough for a happy life. But on the other hand, if virtue alone makes people happy, it does not necessarily follow that only what is honorable is good. Philosophers like Xenocrates and Speusippus believe that a person can be happy through virtue alone, but they do not think that only what is honorable is good. Epicurus also says that a person with virtue is happy, but he argues that virtue alone is not enough for a happy life because it is the pleasure that comes from virtue, not virtue itself, that makes one happy. But this distinction is pointless because the same philosopher also says that virtue never exists without pleasure. Therefore, if virtue always comes with pleasure and is inseparable from it, then virtue is enough on its own. For virtue brings pleasure with it and does not exist without it, even when it is by itself. But it is absurd to say that a person will be happy through virtue alone, yet not completely happy. I cannot see how that can be, since the happy life contains a good that is perfect and cannot be surpassed. If a person has this good, their life is fully happy. Now, if the life of the gods contains nothing greater or better, and the happy life is divine, then there is no higher level to which a person can be elevated. Also, if the happy life lacks nothing, then every happy life is perfect. It is happy and at the same time the happiest. Do you have any doubt that the happy life is the supreme good? Therefore, if it possesses the supreme good, it is supremely happy. Just as the supreme good cannot be increased, for what can be greater than what is supreme? The happy life cannot be increased either. It is not without the supreme good. If you say that one person is happier than another, you are also saying that someone can be much happier, which means making countless distinctions in the supreme good. I understand the supreme good to be that which allows no degree above itself. If one person is less happy than another, it follows that they would prefer the life of another, happier person over their own. But the happy person prefers no other life to their own. Either of these two things is unbelievable. That there should be anything left for a happy person to wish for more than what they have, or that they would not prefer what is better than what they already have. For certainly, the wiser a person is, the more they will strive for the best, and they will desire to achieve it by any means possible. But how can someone be happy if they still need, or rather are still bound to crave something else? I will tell you where this mistake comes from. People do not understand that the happy life is a single, unified thing. It is its quality, not its quantity, that makes such a life the highest form of existence. Therefore, there is complete equality between a long life and a short life.
What's
Between
that,
a
Lovey?
life that spreads out in many directions
Oh,
and
I'm
one that
doing
is
good.
focused on a single goal. Those who measure life by number, size, or parts take away what makes it unique. Now, what is the unique feature of a happy life? It is fullness. I think that satiety, the feeling of being full, is the limit to our eating or drinking. A eats more, and B eats less. What difference does it make? Both are now satisfied. Or A drinks more and B drinks less. What difference does it make? Both are no longer thirsty. Similarly, A lives for many years and B for fewer. It does not matter, as long as A's many years bring as much happiness as B's few years. The person you claim is less happy is not happy at all. The word happy does not allow for degrees. He who is brave is fearless. He who is fearless is free from sadness. He who is free from sadness is happy. Our Stoic school created this argument, and those who try to refute it say that we Stoics assume a premise that is false and highly contested. That the brave person is fearless. What they say, will the brave person have no fear of the dangers they face? That would be the condition of a madman, not a brave person. The brave person will, it's true, feel fear only a little, but they are not completely free from fear. Now, those who argue this way are falling back on their old reasoning, treating vices in lesser degrees as if they were virtues. For indeed, the person who does feel fear, even if it is rare and slight, is not free from wickedness, but is only troubled by it to a lesser extent. Not so, they reply, for I believe that a person is mad if they do not fear real dangers. What you say is true if the dangers are real evils, but if the person knows they are not evils and believes that the only evil is moral baseness, they will have to face dangers without anxiety and despise things that others cannot help fearing. Or if it is characteristic of a fool or a madman not to fear evils, then the wiser a person is, the more they will fear such things. So, they argue, the Stoics believe that a brave person will expose themselves to dangers. By no means, they will simply not fear them, although they will avoid them. It is right for them to be careful but not fearful. What then? Should they not fear death, imprisonment, burning, and all other threats of fortune? Not at all, because they know that these are not evils but only sin. They consider all these things to be like nightmares that trouble the minds of people. Paint a picture of slavery, whips, chains, poverty, mutilation by disease or torture, or any other fearsome thing. A brave person will see these as terrifying only to those who are afraid. Or do you think that something is truly evil if one day we might choose to face it willingly? What then, you ask, is truly evil? It is yielding to those things that are falsely called evils. It is surrendering our freedom to them when we should suffer anything to keep our freedom. Freedom is lost unless we learn to despise those things that try to enslave us. If people understood what bravery is, they would have no doubts about how brave a person should behave. Bravery is not thoughtless rashness, love of danger, or seeking out frightening things. It is the knowledge that helps us distinguish between what is evil and what is not. Bravery takes the greatest care of itself and endures with the greatest patience all things that falsely appear to be evil. What then, you ask, if the sword is held over your brave man's neck? If he is continually wounded, if he sees his intestines in his lap, if he is tortured again after being given a break so that he feels the pain more intensely, and if the blood flows afresh from his wounds, he has no fear? Would you say he feels no pain either? Yes, he feels pain because no human virtue can eliminate feelings. But he does not fear. He remains unconquered, looking down on the sufferings from a high place. Do you want to know what spirit animates him in these moments? It is the spirit of someone comforting a sick friend. That which is evil causes harm. That which causes harm makes a person worse. But pain and poverty do not make a person worse. Therefore, they are not evils. Your argument says the critic is wrong because not everything that causes harm necessarily makes someone worse. A storm and squall cause harm to a sailor, but they do not make him a worse sailor. Some Stoics respond to this by saying the sailor does become worse because of the storm or squall, as he cannot accomplish his goal and hold his course. In terms of his skill, he is not worse, but in his work he is worse. To this, the Peripatetics respond. Therefore, poverty will make even the wise person worse, as will pain or any other similar thing. Although these things won't take away his virtue, they will hinder its work. This would be correct if it weren't for the fact that the sailor and the wise person are different kinds of people. The wise person's goal in life is not to achieve everything at all costs, but to do everything correctly. The sailor's goal is to bring the ship safely to port at all costs. The arts, like sailing, serve life. Wisdom, however, commands life. For myself, I think a different answer should be given. That the sailor's skill is never made worse by a storm, nor is his application of it. The sailor promised you not a successful career, but the skilled practice of his art. That is, expert knowledge of steering the ship. And the more he is hindered by fortune, the more his skill becomes apparent. The sailor who could say, Neptune, you will never sink this ship except on an even keel, has fulfilled the requirements of his art. The storm does not interfere with his skill, only with his success. What then, you ask? Isn't a sailor harmed by something that prevents him from reaching port, frustrates all his efforts, and either drives him out to sea or strands the ship? No, it does not harm him as a sailor, only as a traveler. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a sailor. In fact, it's so far from hindering his skill that it even showcases it. Anyone can steer a ship in calm seas. The proverb says so. These misfortunes disrupt the journey, but not the skill of the sailor. A sailor has two roles. One as a passenger, like everyone else on the ship, and one as a sailor, which is unique to him. The storm affects him as a passenger, not a sailor. Likewise, external circumstances like poverty or pain don't make a wise person less wise. They might limit what he can do for others, but they don't stop him from living wisely. A wise person is always active, even in difficult times. They are at their best when fortune challenges them. Their wisdom benefits both themselves and others, and they're prepared for whatever life throws at them. Just as animal trainers can tame the fiercest creatures, a wise person can tame life's challenges like pain, poverty, and disgrace. These are things most people fear, but when these challenges meet a wise person, they become subdued. Farewell. Letter 86, on Scipio's Villa. I am resting at the country house that once belonged to Scipio Afrinicus himself, and I'm writing to you after paying my respects to his spirit and to what I believe might be the tomb of this great warrior. I believe his soul has returned to the skies, where it came from, not because he led large armies, since even a madman like Cambyses had large armies, but because he showed remarkable self-control and a strong sense of duty. I admire this quality in him even more after he left Rome than when he was defending it. Because he faced a difficult choice, either Scipio should stay in Rome, or Rome should stay free. Scipio said, I don't want to break our laws or customs in any way. Let all Roman citizens have equal rights. My country, enjoy the good I've done for you, but do it without me. I've been the reason for your freedom, and I'll also be the proof of it. I'll go into exile if I've become more than what is good for you. How can I not admire his grace, which led him to leave voluntarily and relieve the state of its burden? Things have reached the point where either freedom would harm Scipio or Scipio would harm freedom. Either of those outcomes would have been wrong in the eyes of the gods. So Scipio stepped aside and moved to Litton, making the state just as much in his debt for his exile as it was for the exile of Hannibal. I've looked around the house, which is made of cut stone. There's a wall enclosing a forest, towers built outwards on both sides to defend the house. A well hidden among buildings and trees that's big enough to supply an entire army. And a small bath buried in darkness, just like they used to be in the old days. Our ancestors didn't think you could have a hot bath unless it was dark. It was a great pleasure for me to compare Scipio's way of living with our own. Imagine in this tiny space the terror of Carthage. The man Rome should think, for not being captured more than once, used to bathe his body after working in the fields. Scipio was used to keeping himself busy and working the land with his own hands, just like the good old Romans used to do. Under this simple roof, he stood, and this plain floor supported his weight. But who today could bear to bathe like that? We think we're poor and lowly if our walls aren't decorated with large, expensive mirrors, if our marble from Alexandria isn't surrounded by mosaics made from Numidian stone, if their borders aren't covered with intricate patterns arranged in many colors like paintings, if our vaulted ceilings aren't covered in glass, if our swimming pools aren't lined with Thasian marble, which used to be a rare and wonderful sight in any temple, pools into which we lower ourselves after sweating heavily, and finally, if the water doesn't pour out from silver taps. So far, I've been talking about ordinary baths. What should I say about those owned by freedmen? What a vast number of statues, of columns that don't support anything but are there just for decoration, just to spend money. And what huge amounts of water that crash down from one level to another. We've become so luxurious that we won't even walk on anything but precious stones. In Scipio's bath, there are tiny slits. You can't really call them windows, cut out of the stone wall to let light in without weakening the structure. But nowadays, people think baths are only good enough for moths if they aren't arranged to get sunlight all day long through the widest windows. If men can't bathe and get a tan at the same time, if they can't look out from their baths over stretches of land and sea, that's how it goes. Baths that used to draw crowds and admiration when they were first opened are now avoided and considered old-fashioned as soon as luxury comes up with some new idea, which will eventually lead to its downfall. In the early days, though, there were only a few baths, and they weren't decorated in any fancy way. Why would people decorate something that cost just a penny and was invented for use, not for pleasure? In those days, bathers didn't have water poured over them, and it didn't always run fresh as if from a hot spring. They didn't care if the water they washed their dirt off in was perfectly clean. How delightful it is to enter that dark bath with a plain roof, knowing that your hero Cato as Aedile, or Fabius Maximus, or one of the Cornelii, had heated the water with his own hands. For it used to be the duty of the highest-ranking Aediles to enter the public baths and demand that they be cleaned and heated to the temperature needed for use and health, not the blazing heat that's fashionable today. So hot that a slave condemned for some crime ought to be boiled alive in it. It seems to me that nowadays there's no difference between saying the bath is on fire and the bath is warm. Some people today might look down on Scipio as unsophisticated because he didn't let sunlight into his steam room through wide windows or didn't roast in the strong sunlight and lounge around until he could stew in the hot water. Poor fool, they might say. He didn't know how to live. He didn't bathe in filtered water. It was often cloudy and after heavy rains almost muddy. But it didn't matter much to Scipio if he had to bathe like that. He went there to wash off sweat, not ointment. And what do you think some people might say in response? They might say, I don't envy Scipio, that was really an exile's life, to put up with baths like those. Friend, if you were wiser, you'd know that Scipio didn't bathe every day. It's reported by those who have passed down the old ways of Rome that the Romans only washed their arms and legs daily because those were the parts that got dirty during their daily work. And they bathed their whole bodies only once a week. Someone might respond, yeah, they might have been pretty dirty guys. How they must have smelled. But they smelled of the camp, the farm, and heroism. Now that fancy baths have been invented, people are actually dirtier than they were before. What does Horatius Flaxus say when he wants to describe a scoundrel, someone known for his extreme luxury? He says, Bucillus smells of perfume. Show me a Bucillus these days and he'd actually smell like a goat. He'd take the place of Gorgonius, with whom Horace compared him in the same passage. Nowadays, it's not enough to use ointment unless you put on a fresh coat 2 or 3 times a day to keep it from evaporating on your skin. But why should a person brag about this perfume as if it were their own? If what I'm saying seems too pessimistic to you, blame it on Scipio's country house where I learned a lesson from Aegialus, a very careful landowner and now the owner of this estate. He taught me that a tree can be transplanted no matter how old it is. We old men need to learn this lesson because none of us are planting an olive grove for ourselves. We're doing it for those who will come after us. I've seen them bear fruit in due time after 3 or 4 years of producing nothing. And you too shall be shaded by a tree that grows slowly but brings comfort to your grandchildren in the years to come, as our poet Virgil says. But Virgil wasn't trying to be perfectly accurate. He wanted to write what sounded best, not what was closest to the truth. For example, leaving aside all his other mistakes, I'll quote this passage when I notice an error today. In spring, sow beans, and then, O clever plant, you're welcomed by the crumbling soil, and millet calls for yearly care. You can judge by this whether these plants should be set out at the same time, or whether they should both be planted in the spring. It's June as I write this, and we're well into July, and just today I've seen farmers harvesting beans and sowing millet. But to get back to the olive grove, I saw it being planted in 2 ways. If the trees were large, Aegialus would take their trunks and cut off the branches, leaving only about a foot of each branch. He then transplanted them with the root ball after cutting off the roots, leaving only the thick part from which the roots hang. He smeared this with manure and placed it in the hole, not only heaping up the earth around it, but also stamping and pressing it down. He says there's nothing more effective than this packing process because it keeps out the cold and the wind. Besides, the trunk doesn't shake as much, and this packing helps the young roots to grow and take hold in the soil. These roots are still soft and have only a slight grip, so even a little shaking can uproot them. Aegialus also trims the root ball before covering it up because he believes that new roots will grow from all the trim parts. Also, the trunk should only stand about 3 or 4 feet above the ground. This way, there will be thick growth from the base, and there won't be a large dry withered stump like an old tree. The second way he planted was similar. He set out branches that were strong and had soft bark, like those of young saplings. These grow a little more slowly, but since they come from a kind of cutting, they have a smoother and more attractive appearance. Recently, I also saw a nut vine transplanted from its original vineyard. In this case, you should gather the roots together, if possible, and then cover the vine stem more generously so that the roots can even grow from the trunk. I've seen these transplants done not only in February, but even at the very end of March, and the vines took hold of and climbed up fallen elms. But Aegialus says that all trees with thick trunks should be watered with tank water. If we have this resource, we can create our own rain. I won't tell you any more of these tips because, as Aegialus did with me, I might be training you to become my competitor. Farewell. Letter 87. Some arguments in favor of the simple life. I was shipwrecked before I even boarded the ship. I won't go into the details of how that happened right now, because you might think it's just another one of those strange Stoic sayings, but whenever you're ready to listen, or even if you're not, I'll prove to you that these words are true, and not as surprising as they first seem. In the meantime, my journey has taught me just how much we own that we don't really need, and how easy it is to give up things when we have to, without feeling their loss. My friend Maximus and I spent 2 very happy days together, taking with us only a few slaves, just 1 carriage load, and no extra stuff except what we were wearing. We slept on mattresses laid on the ground with 2 simple rugs, one underneath us and one to cover us. Our meals were simple and took less than an hour to prepare, and we always had dried figs with us, as well as writing tablets. If I had bread, I ate the figs with it. If not, I ate the figs on their own. Every day felt like a feast to me because I filled it with good thoughts and a peaceful mind. For the soul is never greater than when it lets go of unnecessary things, finds peace by fearing nothing, and becomes rich by not craving wealth. The cart I rode in was a simple farmer's cart, and the mules pulling it only moved enough to show they were alive. The driver was barefoot, and not because it was summer, but because that's just how he lived. I have to admit it, I was a bit embarrassed for others to think this cart was mine. I'm still a little ashamed to fully embrace the simple life in public. Whenever we meet a more luxurious group of travelers, I couldn't help but blush. This proves that while I approve and applaud this way of living, it hasn't completely settled into my heart yet. If I'm embarrassed by riding in a simple cart, I'd probably boast. If I were riding in something fancy. So I'm not quite there yet. I still care too much about what others think of me when I travel. But instead of worrying about that, I should be telling people, you're mistaken, you're misled, you admire things that don't really matter. You don't judge people for who they really are. When it comes to money, you calculate very carefully who you should lend money to or do favors for, as if giving a favor is just another transaction. You might say things like, he has a lot of land, but he also has a lot of debt. Or he has a fancy house, but it's all on borrowed money. Or no one can show off a better entourage on short notice, but he can't pay his bills. If he pays his creditors, he'll have nothing left. You should figure out the true worth of each person by eliminating all the extras they own. You might call a man rich because he travels with gold dishes, owns land in every province, keeps large account books, and has estates so big that people would be envious if they were just wastelands. But after all that, he's still poor. Why? Because he's in debt. How much, you ask? Everything he has. Or maybe you think it matters whether he owes money to another person or to fate. What good are mules dressed up in fancy gear, or chariots decorated with gold and purple, with horses covered in gold and tapestries chomping on golden bits? None of these things make the master or the mule any better. Marcus Cato, the censor, who did as much for the state as Scipio did, because while Scipio fought our enemies, Cato fought against our bad habits, used to ride a simple donkey. This donkey carried not just Cato, but also the saddlebags with all his necessities. Imagine if you met one of today's fancy travelers on the road, with their escorts and luxury attendants. The dandy would probably seem more refined and well-attended compared to Cato, who, even with all his simple gear, would be wondering whether to reach for his sword or his hunting knife. What a time it must have been, when a general who had celebrated a triumph, a censor, and most importantly a Cato, was content with just one simple horse, and not even the whole horse, because the saddlebags took up some of the space. Wouldn't you rather have Cato's worn-out horse than a dandy's whole retinue of fat ponies, Spanish horses, and fast trotters? I can see that this topic could go on forever unless I stop myself. So I'll end here on the topic of these unnecessary things. The man who first called them hindrances must have had a prophetic sense of how they would turn out to be exactly that. Now, I'd like to share with you a few logical arguments from our school that deal with the idea of virtue, which we believe is enough to live a happy life. That which is good makes people good. For example, what is good in music makes the musician, but random events don't make a person good, so they aren't goods. The Peripatetics, another school of thought, respond by saying that this statement is false. People don't always become good just because they have something good. In music, for instance, there are good things like a flute or a harp, but these instruments alone don't make a musician. We would reply, you misunderstand what we mean by what is good in music. We're not talking about what equips the musician, but what makes the musician. You're talking about the instruments, not the art itself. If anything in music is truly good, it will always make a musician. I'd like to make this even clearer. We define the good in music in two ways. First, by what helps the musician perform, and second, what helps his art. Musical instruments like flutes and harps help the performance, but they don't create the musician's art. The musician is an artist even without them, though he might not be able to practice his art. But the good in a person is not twofold like this, for the good of a person and the good of life are the same. That which can fall to the lot of any person, no matter how base or despised, is not a good. But wealth can fall to the lot of a panda or a trainer of gladiators, so wealth is not good. The Peripatetics say this statement is also wrong because we see that good things can fall to the lowest sorts of people, not just in scholarly pursuits, but also in medicine or navigation. However, these arts don't claim to have greatness of soul. They don't rise to any heights or look down on fortune brings. Virtue, on the other hand, lifts people up and places them above what others value. Virtue doesn't crave too much or fear too much of what is considered good or bad. Killian, one of Cleopatra's eunuchs, had great wealth, and recently Natolis, a man whose speech was as shameless as it was dirty, who did the vilest things with his mouth, was both the heir of many and made many his heirs. What then? Did his wealth make him unclean? Or did he make his wealth unclean? Money sometimes falls into the hands of people like a coin falling into a sewer. Virtue stands above all things. It is valued on its own merits and doesn't consider these random windfalls to be good. But medicine and navigation don't prevent the practitioners from being impressed by such things. A person who isn't good can still be a doctor, a pilot, or a scholar, just like they can be a cook. If someone has something that is not random, that person cannot be called random. A person is worth what they possess. A strong box is only as valuable as what it holds, or rather it's just an accessory to what it holds. Who values a full purse for anything other than the money inside? The same goes for owners of large estates. They are just accessories to their possessions. Why then is the wise person great? Because they have a great soul. So it's true that what falls to even the most despicable person is not a good. For this reason, I would never consider inactivity a good, because even a tree frog or a flea has that quality. Nor would I consider rest and freedom from trouble a good, because what is more at leisure than a worm? Do you ask what makes a person wise? The same thing that makes a god. You must agree that the wise person has something godlike, heavenly, and grand about them. The good doesn't come to everyone, nor does it let just anyone possess it. Look at how each country has its own special produce. Here corn grows best, there the vine grows better. In another place trees and grass grow naturally. See how Tmolus sends out his saffron, India its ivory, Sheba its incense, and the Calibs their iron. These products are given to different countries so that people have to trade with each other, each seeking something from their labor in return. In the same way, the supreme good has its own home. It doesn't grow where ivory grows or iron. You ask where the supreme good is, in the soul. And unless the soul is pure and holy, there's no room in it for God. Good does not come from evil, but riches come from greed, so riches are not good. The Peripatetics respond, that's not true. Good can come from evil. Money can come from sacrilege and theft. So although sacrilege and theft are evil, they are evil only because they cause more harm than good. They bring profit, but that profit comes with fear, anxiety, and suffering. Anyone who says this must admit that sacrilege, though evil, because it causes much harm, is partly good because it brings some benefit. But how can something so monstrous be true? We've actually convinced the world that sacrilege, theft, and adultery are among the goods. How many people don't blush at theft, and how many boast of committing adultery? Petty sacrilege is punished, but grand sacrilege is honored with a triumph. Besides, if sacrilege is partly good, it must also be honorable and considered right conduct, because it concerns ourselves. But no thoughtful person can accept this idea.
Long ago, Narlek's journeyed to this cavern.
Therefore, good cannot come from evil, just as figs don't grow from olive trees. Things produce according to the seed, and goods cannot come from evil. Just as what is honorable doesn't come from what is base, neither does good come from evil. For the honorable and the good are the same. Some in our school argue against this, saying, let's suppose money from any source is a good. Even if it is gained through sacrilege, the money doesn't come from sacrilege itself. You can understand this through an example. In the same jar, there's a piece of gold and a serpent. If you take the gold from the jar, it's not because the serpent is there too, but despite the serpent. Similarly, profit comes from sacrilege, not because sacrilege is evil, but because it also contains profit. Just like the serpent in the jar is evil, but the gold is not. But I disagree with this because the situations aren't the same. In one case, I can take the gold without touching the serpent. In the other, I can't get the profit without committing sacrilege. The profit isn't separate from the crime, it's mixed with it. That which causes many evils while we try to gain it is not good. But while we seek riches, we get involved in many evils, so riches are not good. The Peripatetics say your first statement has two meanings. One is that we get involved in many evils while trying to gain riches, but we also get involved in many evils while seeking virtue. One person might suffer shipwreck while traveling to study, and another might be captured. The second meaning is that if something causes us to get involved in evils, it is not a good. But this doesn't logically follow for riches or pleasure. Otherwise, if riches cause us to get involved in many evils, then riches are not just not a good, but they are actually an evil. But you only argue that they're not a good. Moreover, you admit that riches have some use. You consider them advantages, but by your reasoning, they can't even be an advantage because we suffer many disadvantages while pursuing them. Some people answer this by saying you're wrong to blame riches. Riches themselves don't harm anyone. It's people's own foolishness or the wickedness of others that causes harm. Just as a sword by itself doesn't kill. It's the weapon used by the killer. Riches themselves don't harm you, just because you suffer harm because of them. I think Posidonius' reasoning is better. He says that riches cause evil, not because they do evil themselves, but because they drive people to do evil. The direct cause, which immediately causes harm, is one thing, and the indirect cause is another. The indirect cause lies in riches. They inflate the spirit and breed pride. They create unpopularity and unsettle the mind so much that even the mere reputation of having wealth, though it is bound to harm us, still brings delight. All true goods should be free from blame. They are pure, they don't corrupt the spirit, and they don't tempt us. They have lived and broadened the spirit, but without puffing it up. Goods produce confidence, but riches produce shamelessness. Goods give us greatness of soul, but riches give us arrogance, and arrogance is nothing more than a false appearance of greatness. According to that argument, says the objector, riches are not only not a good, but they're actually an evil. Now, riches would be an evil if they did harm themselves, and if, as I said before, the direct cause lay in them. But in reality, it's the indirect cause that lies in riches, and it not only stirs the spirit, but actually drags it along. Yes, riches give us a false appearance of good, which looks real and convinces many people. The indirect cause also exists in virtue. It brings envy, for many become unpopular because of their wisdom and their injustice. But this case, though it lies in virtue, doesn't come from virtue itself, nor is it a false appearance of the real thing. On the contrary, the vision that virtue gives to people's spirits is far more like reality, calling them to love and admire it. Posidonius thinks the argument should be framed like this. Things that don't give the soul greatness, confidence, or freedom from care are not goods. But riches, health, and similar things don't do these. Therefore, riches and health are not goods. He goes further by saying, things that don't give the soul greatness, confidence, or freedom from care, but instead create arrogance, vanity, and insolence are evils. But things like that come from fortune, lead us into these evils. Therefore, these things are not goods. But, says the objector, by this reasoning, things given by fortune aren't even advantages. No, advantages and goods are different. An advantage is something with more usefulness than trouble, but a good should be pure and free from harm. A thing isn't good just because it has more benefit than harm, but only if it has no harm at all. Besides, advantages can be found in animals, imperfect people, and fools, so the advantages can have some disadvantage mixed in, but it's called advantageous because the good part outweighs the bad. However, the good can only be found in the wise person. It must be pure. Now, be of good cheer. There's only one more difficult argument to untangle, though it's a tough one. Good doesn't come from evil, but riches come from many cases of poverty, so riches are not a good. Our school doesn't accept this argument, but the Peripatetics created it and offered a solution. Posidonius says that this fallacy, which has been debated in all schools of logic, was refuted by Antipater, who explained, the word poverty doesn't mean possessing something, but rather not possessing, or as the ancients said, deprivation. Poverty refers not to what a person has, but what they lack. So, there can't be fullness from many voids. Riches come from many things, not many lacks. You misunderstand what poverty means. Poverty isn't having little but lacking much. It's about what a person doesn't have. I could explain this more easily if there were a Latin word that could translate the Greek word for not possessing. Antipater applies this quality to poverty, but I believe poverty is simply having little. If we ever have more time, we'll explore what wealth and poverty really mean. But for now, we should focus on reducing poverty and arrogance and wealth rather than getting caught up in words as if the issue were already settled. Let's say we're called to a meeting to discuss getting rid of wealth. Will these arguments help us make the Roman people choose poverty and praise it? The poverty that was the foundation and cause of their empire, and fear their current wealth, realizing they took it from those they conquered. Will they understand that wealth brought office-seeking, bribery, and disorder into a city once known for its honesty and moderation? Will they see that whatever one nation took from others can be taken away even more easily from that one? It would be better to support this idea by our actions and confront our desires directly rather than to try to outsmart them with logic. If we can, let's speak more boldly. If not, let's speak more honestly. Farewell. Letter 88 on Liberal and Vocational Studies. You wanted to know what I think about liberal studies. My answer is that I don't respect any study, and I don't consider any study good, if it is only about making money. These studies are just jobs that make money, and they are only useful because they get the mind ready for something bigger and don't keep it busy forever. We should spend time on them only until the mind can move on to something greater. They are like training, not the real work. That's why they're called liberal studies, because they are the kinds of studies that are supposed to be worthy of a free person. But there is really only one study that truly makes a person free, and that is the study of wisdom. Wisdom is noble, brave, and great-spirited. All other studies are small and childish. You wouldn't think there's anything good in the subjects taught by people who are, as you can see, often low and shameful. We shouldn't spend our time learning these things. We should be done with it. Some people have decided that the real question about liberal studies is whether they make people good, but they don't even try to teach about this important topic. The scholar spends his time studying language, and if he wants to go further, he studies history, or if he wants to go as far as he can, he studies poetry. But how do any of these things help you become virtuous? Do they get rid of fear, stop desire, or control your emotions? The question is, do these scholars teach virtue or not? If they don't teach it, then they don't pass it on. If they do teach it, then they are philosophers. Do you want to know how you can tell that they don't teach virtue? Look at how different their subjects are. If they taught the same thing, their subjects would be more alike. Maybe they try to make you believe that Homer was a philosopher, but they actually prove he wasn't by their own arguments. Sometimes they say Homer was a Stoic who valued only virtue, rejected pleasure, and wouldn't give up his honor even for immortality. Other times they say he was an Epicurean, enjoying a peaceful life full of feasts and songs. Sometimes they claim he was a peripatetic, dividing goodness into 3 parts. Other times they make him out to be an academic, believing that nothing is certain, but it's clear that Homer wasn't any of these, because these ideas all contradict each other. We might agree with them that Homer was wise, but surely he became wise before he knew anything about poetry. So let's learn what actually made Homer wise. It doesn't really matter if we find out whether Homer or Hesiod was the older poet any more than it matters why Hecuba, even though she was younger than Helen, looked so much older and sadder. What's the point of figuring out the ages of Achilles and Patroclus? Are you more interested in figuring out where Ulysses traveled than in figuring out how to keep yourself from going astray? We don't have time to listen to lectures about whether Ulysses wandered between Italy and Sicily or outside the known world, because such a long journey couldn't have happened in such a small area. We deal with storms in our minds that toss us around every day, and our bad behavior leads us into the same kinds of troubles that Ulysses faced. There's always something beautiful to tempt us, or an enemy to attack us. On one side, there are dangerous monsters that crave human blood, and on the other side, there are lies and false pleasures, and then there's shipwreck and all kinds of other disasters. Show me, through the example of Ulysses, how to love my country, my wife, and my father, and how, even after facing shipwreck, I can still strive toward these noble goals. Why bother asking if Penelope was truly faithful, or if she outsmarted her suitors, or whether she knew the man before her was Ulysses before she realized it was him? Instead, teach me what purity is, how valuable it is, and whether it comes from the body or the soul. Now let's move on to the musician. You're teaching me how different notes, like the high ones and the low ones, can work together in harmony, but even though they come from different strings. But instead, help me bring my soul into harmony so that my goals aren't out of tune with each other. You're showing me what the sad notes sound like. Instead, show me how to keep from singing a sad song, even when life is hard. The mathematician teaches me how to measure my land, but I'd rather learn how to figure out what's enough for a person to own. He teaches me to count and how to be greedy, but I'd prefer him to teach me that these calculations don't really matter and that being rich doesn't make you any happier, especially when you need so many people just to keep track of all your possessions. What good is it to know how to divide up land if I don't know how to share it with my brother? What good is it to measure land down to the last inch and notice even the smallest mistake if I get angry when my bad-tempered neighbor takes a tiny piece of my land? The The mathematician teaches me not to lose any of my boundaries. I want to learn how to give them all away without a second thought. But someone says I'm being driven off the land that my father and grandfather owned. So what? Who owned it before your grandfather? Do you even know who originally owned the land? You didn't start out as the master of the land, just a renter. And whose renter are you? If you win your case, you're just the renter of the air. Lawyers say that public property can't be owned privately. What you hold and call your own actually belongs to everyone. It's public property. Oh, what amazing skill. You know how to measure a circle. You can find the area of any shape and you can calculate the distance between the stars. There's nothing you can't measure. But if you're truly a master of your craft, measure the human mind for me. Tell me how big it is or how small it is. You know what a straight line is, but what good does that do if you don't know what's straight in life? Next, let's talk about the person who prides himself on knowing all about the stars and planets. Who knows where the cold star of Saturn hides and the path Mercury takes? What good is it to know this? Will it just make me worry because Saturn and Mars are in opposition? Or when Mercury sets at sunset in plain sight of Saturn, instead of learning that these stars, no matter where they are always favorable and unchanging? These stars are driven by an unending cycle of destiny on a path that can change. They return at specific times. They either start the world's work or mark the times when it pauses. But if they control everything that happens, how will it help you to know the secrets of what can't be changed? Or if they only give signs of what will happen, what good is it to see what you can't avoid? Whether you know these things or not, they will happen anyway. Look at the fleeting sun and stars that follow it, and you'll never find the next day playing tricks on you, or a night that misleads you with clear skies. However, it's already been determined that I'm safe from being misled by anything. What, you ask? Does the morrow never play me false? Anything that happens with my knowledge plays me false. For my part, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know what could happen. I'm not worried about this. I'm ready for whatever the future brings. And if the future is less harsh than expected, I'll be grateful. If the future is kind to me, it might feel like I've been tricked, but it doesn't deceive me. Because just as I know that anything can happen, I also know that not everything will happen. I'm ready for good things to happen in every case, but I'm also prepared for the bad things. I must apologize if I don't follow the usual path in this discussion. I don't agree that paintings belong on the list of liberal arts any more than sculpture, stone cutting, and other skills meant for luxury. I also exclude from the liberal studies wrestling and any knowledge that involves oil and mud. Otherwise, I'd have to include perfume makers, cooks, and anyone else who uses their talents to satisfy our pleasures. What's so liberal about these people who stuff themselves with food until they have to take something to make them vomit, whose bodies are fat but whose minds are thin and weak? Or do we really think that their training is liberal for the young men of Rome, who used to be taught by our ancestors to stand tall and throw a spear, to handle a pike, to guide a horse, and to use weapons? Our ancestors taught their children nothing that can be learned while laying down. But neither the old system nor the new one teaches or fosters virtue. What good does it do to control a horse and guide its speed with the reins, but find that our own passions are running wild?